What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of the Speak On It podcast with K. Sam. Here on the Speak On It podcast, we have a motto. The motto is we're not trying to change the entire world, but change the heart of one person at a time. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all so much for tuning in yet to another episode. On today's episode, I have a special guest joining me from back home in Louisiana. We're going to do this one via Zoom call, so we'll see how this one turns out. But I'm gonna give a little quick intro to this gentleman, and we'll go into how me and him got connected. So joining me is Mr. Alan Cormier from Southwest Louisiana, husband and a father of three. He served our country as a Marine and is currently a police officer. Some of his beliefs: he believed life is full of teachable moments that could be used to build a better future. Alan comes in with 10 years law enforcement experience, where he started his career off in corrections. In corrections, has some experience in riot response, high-risk transports. He's a supervisor, or was a supervisor, or has supervisor experience, and training. He's currently serving in the role of detective with experience in misdemeanor fraud and burglary, theft, and investigations. The reason why I brought Alan on to this episode very specifically, which is titled With You, Alan and some of his crew back home created a nonprofit that is titled With You, which is built by first responders who live a life of service for their community and are focused on supporting fellow first responders and families through mental health and stress crisis. They have created a community where first responders are free from the stigma of seeking help for mental health issues. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Alan Cormier. What's going on, Alan?
Hey, Kay, appreciate it, brother. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you for taking time out your Monday. I would say it's a beautiful Monday. I don't know what kind of weather y'all facing out there back in Louisiana, but it's a beautiful day out here in Texas.
Great. It's it's a beautiful day here. I'm off today, so no matter what it is outside, it's beautiful.
Oh yeah, it's always good. It's always good. So man, I gave a little brief intro from what you gave me, so I'll give you a couple minutes to further elaborate about yourself, kind of where you from, what made you get into law enforcement, and then we'll jump into more about the foundation.
Let's see. I am from Southwest Louisiana, Lake Charles, Louisiana, born and raised. Pretty simple, hometown boy. Went to college, did the thing, joined the Marine Corps, did the thing, got out, didn't have a plan, but knew I was going to be successful somewhere. And it's a funny thing. I just asked my dad if he could get me a job at the sheriff's office where he worked at. And a couple weeks later, I was applied, going through the hiring process, and then started my career. It was a pretty quick transition and got involved, liked it, and still there 10 years later.
10 years. I'm tapping in. Well, I just hit my 8-year mark, so I'm not far behind you. It goes by quick, though, man.
It does. The first couple of years were a little slow. The next thing you look up and you're an old guy.
Yeah. But first off, man, thank you for your service with serving our country, man. That's big. Marines, right?
Yes, sir.
So funny story. In high school, I didn't think I was going to college, but you know how the Marines and Army and stuff, the recruiters would come to high school and try to recruit the seniors and stuff. And a Marine recruiter came, and man, I was all in, bro. My family did not like that. I had my little Marine lanyard, man, for my keys. I was ready to go. And then I guess luckily I had a breakout season my senior year of football, and that's the only reason why I did not go to the military. But yeah, if I was gonna do it, I was going to the Marines.
Oh yeah, I had interest in high school. Dad's a Marine. Family's military service, come from a tradition of it, and being my generation, Dad wanted me to go to college first, so I put it off. And then toward the end of college, I pretty much hadn't left Lake Charles. I hadn't really done much with myself except what I was supposed to do, and looked for a challenge. And the recruiters were there. I was a big boy. I was about 315 pounds at the time, and I remember the recruiter telling me that no way I'd ever make it. Going to make weight, and I think within a year was off to boot camp down around 220 pounds, and it was a good little kick in the teeth for me. But yeah, it was a start of something good for me. Definitely made me grow up.
Yeah. So let's dive into some conversation here. So, did your military experience has had anything to do with you wanting to join law enforcement? I know it's pretty common for people who served in the military. Once they get done serving, they want to continue serving in some capacity, and most turn towards law enforcement. Did that play a role for you in any?
Honestly, no. My father, he's a police officer. You know, he retired 30 years. And I never had a desire to be a cop. I watched what he went through, didn't want to. I think service is how I was raised. And my aspirations was to be a coach and a teacher. And when I got back from the Marine Corps, jobs were a little scarce and I needed a job. And so the quickest way to find a job with benefits was getting into law enforcement. At that point, hundreds of applicants were going through and I needed a steady paycheck and some benefits. So I jumped in with the idea that maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, I'd finish my master's, find a teaching job and move on. And well, education happened, but moving on hasn't. So I'm still there.
Yeah. So you start off as a corrections officer, right?
Correct.
How is that different from being a full time like law enforcement officer, like being the police? So being a corrections officer is dealing essentially with the same suspects, but it's in a different capacity. And I don't think people realize that. I even heard some people say that being a correction officer was a lot harder than being a police officer out on the streets.
Well, my career's been interesting. I haven't done much patrol experience. Actually, I've never literally done patrol in the sense of being assigned to patrol. I went from corrections to investigations. Corrections was a world that I was not prepared for. I was 27 years old, and we hired straight into corrections. Things have changed a little bit, but at that time, whether you were 18, prior law enforcement, prior military, you were starting in corrections with our department, and it was eye opening. You walk in there and you realize you're learning who you're dealing with every day on the street. So the information was there. If you were willing to learn, you were going to pick up a lot of things, and I did. I was willing to learn. I was willing to meet these guys where they were at and take advantage of who they were, and that's kind of why I ended up hanging out in corrections for 7 years. Is there's just a wealth of information there. Once you know some of those guys and you get involved and you start paying attention, you're pretty much collecting data on who they are, who they hang out, who they associate with, who comes to see them, how they operate. And if you sit back and you look from an actual like investigative standpoint, it was just a data mine of information, and I fell in love with that kind of concept. And so I put roots down there, but it's different because you're kind of, I don't want to say safer, but your help is right around the corner. There's a little, you can be a little bit more aggressive, you can be a little bit more demanding. You don't have to use your words as carefully, I guess you could say, because your partner's right around the corner. You're literally, your backup's literally 5-10 seconds away at most, if you're not already dealing with something 2 or 3 guys deep. And I think it's a safety blanket that guys kind of wear and they forget about when they go to patrol. So they kind of forget how to talk to people. And I think for a lot of guys, that's the biggest transition from corrections into patrol, is realizing that your backup might be coming from 30 minutes away.
Yeah, especially working as a sheriff's deputy.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's pretty common for sheriff's departments, where when you apply, most people apply to be a sheriff's deputy on patrol, but you have to start in the jail, and then eventually, if I'm not mistaken, I know it's different in some agencies, but from what I heard, especially like in Lafayette Parish, you have to do your time in corrections, and then they kind of start pulling people from corrections to be patrol deputies, if that's what they're applying for.
Yeah, it's a solid place to start. You come in, you get your feet wet, you start to realize who you're dealing with. You're 18, 19, 21 years old. You can get at least a full year of training in before you go to the academy. And you start to see what the job's really about and who you're really dealing with. And it allows you to kind of set that foundation where you can be successful and you're not necessarily a rookie when you go to patrol. You've got report writing underneath your belt. You've got dealing with these suspects underneath your belt. You hopefully build a good rapport with them. So when you see them on the street, you know who you're dealing with. and how to approach them. But it can be a hindrance a little bit. But at the same time, guys, if they come in with the mindset of doing it as a career, and you have some good training officers, they're going to set those guys up for success instead of failure.
Yeah, and you just made a good point that if you build a good rapport, and that once you go to the street, that whole respect deal, because I done came across that many times where officers who used to work in the jail that worked with me at Lafayette PD, when they run across people, they built that relationship like, oh man, you remember me from the jail, man, remember how I treated you good, and just that goes a long way with having some compliance.
Yeah, that idea of us versus them is kind of well, when I first started, it was praised us versus them.
Mm-hmm.
It's the good guys versus the bad guys. It kind of works when you talk about officer safety. It kind of works about setting your mentality right on how you want to handle situations. But when it comes down to dealing with them as people, they're not. They're fathers, their husbands, their sons, their cousins, their dads. They've made mistakes and they're there. And if you always look at that us versus them and you forget about building that rapport when it comes out and you see them on the street, because they're in your community, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot on building a better future for our community. So times are changing. We have guys that are thinking about that now. So it's really interesting to see how communications improving, the way we approach people just in general is occurring. And
Yeah.
I like it.
So, man, tell the listeners how you found me and my podcast.
Oh man, I don't know if I want to give Darbone that kind of ego boost. He may not we may not be able to talk to him for a few
Oh,
days.
Mike D, man.
So I joined the Marine Corps and I was in 29 Palms, and this guy Mike Darbone met him out there, Cajun boy from Louisiana, and I guess I had to drive across the country to go meet some guys from my own state, and we were stationed together. And so Mike and I've been friends for 10 years now, and he's in law enforcement. I'm in law enforcement, and we talk once in a while. And then he dropped your podcast randomly a couple years ago, I think it was, and told me to check you out. And never really did, never really thought about it. I was too good for any help. It wasn't my thing. I was more focused on growing my career myself. And then had a little mental health 2020 hit, post COVID, Hurricane Laura, Hurricane Delta. Reached out to Darbo and just talking to him. He threw you back out there again. And so jumped on your podcast. I listened to some previous podcasts, and I was like, all right, you got a guy with passion for law enforcement, and I like his approach. I was like, so at least I can do is reach out to him and see what we can do. And here we are.
Here we are. Shout out to Mike D, man, making connections and helping his fellow brother out, huh? So then once me and you started talking, we had another thing in common with one of my previous guests, with Michael Sugaru. So
Yep, Mike.
you said,
what's up with these guys and Mikes, man?
yeah, Mike's just making connections, huh? So you said you read Mike's book and you listened to his episodes. So man, how did his book help you with your situation? Which I still haven't. I think I'm on like chapter 10 or so. I'm a slow reader, man. It's hard for me just to pick up books and go.
I think I read his book in one night.
Yeah, it is good though. It is good. I remember you said once you started, it was hard for you to put it down, and it is good. It's just I'm a sleepy reader, man. I get sleepy. I get sleepy. Not because the book is boring or the material is boring. It's just I'm not a reader, man. So it's something I'm growing at.
To each their own, and for me, I'm a reader. So we went through COVID 2019. My community got hit by two huge hurricanes. Pretty much destroyed our community. We're still, I mean, it's 3 years later and we're still reeling from it. And, we got hit with a bunch of natural disasters all within a few months. So, throughout my career, I was always taught that, hey, I was capable. I could take it on. Just show up, just deal with it. Just deal with it. The old guys dealt with it. You can deal with this. The next generation is going to be fine. Just deal with it. That's just what we do. Just add it to your rucksack, keep moving forward, no biggie. So Mike wrote his book, Relentless Courage, and I'm not even sure how I came across the book. It was probably a podcast, and I got the book, and once I started reading it, I saw myself in there. I didn't have the same situation he did, but the way he responded to what was going on in his life, I saw a lot of the same things in mine, and so I started it, and I couldn't put it down. And luckily, Mike's story he's being bold about what he went through, and
Mm-hmm.
he's definitely taking a huge stand for first responders and mental health. And it was kind of the push I needed. I didn't have anybody really to turn to. Program my department had EAP. It had all the basic fundamentals, peer support,
Yeah.
EAP. It's all there. But for me, I wasn't comfortable with going to the department, and I didn't want my guys to know. I was a supervisor at the time. I didn't want my guys to know. And this had nothing to do with me and losing a supervisor role. I changed transition from supervisor in corrections to investigations. I didn't want my guys to think any less of me. So I just went on the private side, dealt with it privately. And I got his book, read through it. I highlighted, wrote notes. There's just so many things that connected to me. And I walked into my counselor and I was like, hey, I read this book. You need to read this. Like, I know I'm an enigma with you. Um, my counselor wasn't really first responder or military veteran base, but I said, we have a lot of deep conversations about how I approach the world differently. Like, read this. And it really opened up a lot of conversations for her and I to have about how our brains see the world and what we have to do to come home every night. And the common person just doesn't realize that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you want to dive a little bit deeper? I mean, if you're comfortable with just showing, I guess, explain to the listeners your kind of mental situation that you was going through and kind of what you were struggling with, because it's unique, and it goes back to my last episode, the human element, where I was
Yeah,
explaining how
great.
we are human as police officers. We struggle with things daily. Uh, that we try to be bold and courageous about and just deal with it. And yet we put on this uniform and expect it to go out and help people with their own problems. But then we come home and struggle with our own problems, which is crazy. It's like how you can't take your own advice, you know?
Yeah, I had that. I joined the Marine Corps. I was a Marine. I defined myself as being a Marine. Became a cop. I defined myself as being a cop. I wanted to know every rule, every policy and procedure. Um, uh, a cop's cop. I wanted to be that guy. So I took on that role and I never really took it off when I went home. So over the 8, 9 years I was dealing with stuff, I just kept putting stuff in my back. We had fights, we had stress, you had incidences you went to, critical incidences, never an officer involved shooting, never that incident, never that big defining moment that some guys have in their career. Um, but I had incidences, and it was just like just kept stuffing them down, stuffing them down. My guys don't need to see I'm weak. I'm older. I joined law enforcement a little later in life. So I was like, I'm working with 18, 19, 20 year olds. And hey, I'm 27, 28, 29 years old. I got to show these guys how an adult handles this, how a male handles this. And so took on a lot of stuff, and then COVID hit. We went to working some really crazy hours. Typically we're on a 2-2-3 rotation. COVID hit, and some of us were working 5 12s in a row, a day or two off, 5 12s in a row. We were just shorthanded, health issues. We were all dealing with that. COVID rolls right into 2020, where Hurricane Laura hits us. Um, I left with our inmates, went to another facility, worked 6 days straight, 2 3 hours of sleep a night. We were guests at another facility. Rode out a hurricane in a old building with 300 and something inmates. Talk about being prepared to save the last round if something went bad. There was thoughts, how to prepare for all that. So I went through that. A couple months later in October, we had another hurricane. Same thing. It wasn't nearly as bad as Laura, but it brought on, extra stress. We're working 12-hour shifts. We're doing everything we can to be there for the community. And we were doing everything we could to just show up and be there and be the example. But nobody was looking around taking care of the guys around us. And that's not a hit at our administration, because I still believe they did a great job. I don't think they missed out on anything. I just think it was the nature of what we were going through. And one thing rolled into another. We had a huge week-long freeze in February of 21. We had a historic flood in May. So we were constantly repair mode, constantly just working behind the curve. But November 2020, I don't remember going to work one day. I got to work somehow. I don't remember really the specifics. I remember walking through the back door though, and just kind of having, I think, a panic attack. Not sure. I mean, it was never defined, but um, it was just something about it, and ended up going home. Blood pressure was sky high. Tried to get my wife to take off work to come take me to the hospital because I wasn't taking myself. I'm too good for that. I needed somebody to say, hey, I had to go because you know what? I can handle it. I'm just a little stressed out. Um, and she sat me down when she got home that night and was like, hey, you haven't been the same for a couple months. You need to go see somebody. And that kind of opened the floodgates of having to sit down and really look in the mirror of who I was and what I've become. um, I want to say I'm still successful. I was a successful cop. I took on a lot of roles, but I left myself in the dust. And so for the last 2 years, now three, working on redefining who I am, or not even redefining, going back to who I am. And part of that is understanding that we're humans. We see things that we're not supposed to see every day.
Yeah.
Average statistics is like a normal human being is going to see maybe 5 or 6 critical incidences in a lifetime, and we can see that in a day.
Yeah.
We definitely see that in a week, and we don't get to turn it off. We go through we work in the community where we live in. You drive around town, and you know how it is. Oh, we hit that house last week, or I've been to that call, that bar right there. We had to go handle up on something over there, or the hospital. You know what happens, what comes into an ER, and you're
Mm-hmm.
like, you go there and you see a victim, and so when you go there, it's not the same. You relive these memories, and we don't teach these new guys about it, and so they walk in blind, and then now we're trying to tell them it's okay. Just keep, you can handle it. Just keep going. We dealt with it. You'll be okay. But there's a turn now. There's a turn in what we've gone through is how it really affects us, and we're definitely standing up for the next generation and opening up some new paths on how they can be prepared coming into this job.
Yeah, and earlier you brought up about the EAP and the peer support, which I'm gonna take a stand. Say most agencies have that. I know my department have it. I actually just got an email a couple weeks ago saying I was recommended to join a peer support team, which I think is great. But like me and Mike Suguru had spoke on one of the episodes, I asked him, with so many, I think the last numbers I read out on my last episode was 58 officers in this year alone committed suicide. So again, as first responders, we have the resources. We know the resources to the suicide prevention, but yet we still turn it on ourselves, and officers still committing suicide. And I asked him, I was like, well, we have all these programs. Why are they not being used? And he made a good point. He's like, man, it all comes down to trust. Because if you call a suicide hotline, you don't know who you're talking to. You don't know where this person is. And this is your most vulnerable time where you're opening up to a complete stranger that you are trusting with this information and trusting to help you. The kicker that I just don't understand is that when your normal citizen calls a suicide hotline, it gets sent to the police department. And I just don't, I really do not understand, because if you have somebody who's want to commit suicide, but then on the same hand doesn't like law enforcement, how does that even make sense? And I said it before, and I'll continue to say it. If I could remove one call that law enforcement deal with, it would be going to suicide calls or mental health calls, because that's not something that we should be dealing with, because every call that law enforcement deal with is essentially a weapons call. And what people don't realize is that, like I said that to somebody, I was like, well, what you mean is a weapons call? Like, how can a verbal argument have a weapon involved? I said, well, who brings the weapon to every call? Us, So if you have somebody that want to commit suicide, But some people just don't have that courage or is not bold enough to do it themselves. Suicide by cop. Well, let me go for his gun. Let me fight him for or her for their gun, and then they know what's gonna happen. More than likely that's gonna lead to a deadly encounter. And I really don't understand how that got thrown onto our plate as law enforcement. So, but moving along with that, you created a nonprofit called With You. Explain how that came about and kind of what's going on with that.
Well, through my counseling progression and definitely reading up on Michael's book and some other. I mean, like I said, I'm a huge reader. There locally, there's not help. There's EAP, there's departments, there's trust issues there. We could hash that out all day, and I'd love to, but I don't think we got time for all that. When I had a group of people around me. My brother's a cop. My dad's a cop. Uh, I have a great home life. I have a great family life. I would say there's no dysfunction in my life. And here I am. I'm breaking down.
Yeah.
I would call myself squared away. Other people may not. They might call me crazy. It is what it is. But when I looked at my life, I was squared away, and I should have my things together. And I needed help, and I had no place to turn. I didn't know who to call. I know we had, department resources, but it wasn't a department issue. And that's where I think EAP comes into play. I think when there's things like that, that's perfect. But when it comes down to like the personal side of it, I really didn't have much to turn to. So the nonprofit kind of came to this idea is I wanted to have a place where first responders could reach out, where there was an organization or a group of guys who they could turn to, and we were local. So here we are. And I kind of thought about it for a couple months, kind of played around the idea. I never really pulled the trigger on it until one of my best friends was like, this is a guy who came in law enforcement at 18, 19 years old. He was on my shift. I trained him. I've watched him be a successful police officer. And he went through some stuff I wasn't even aware of. And I'm like, man, I talk to you multiple times a week, and I just never knew. And so that's when we had that conversation. About 3 days later, I brought up the idea, what I'd been thinking about. And he said, if you do it, I'm all in. And I was like, I guess that's all I kind of needed to hear, is the fact that there was somebody else who needed it just as bad as I did. And we ran with it. We started it. We're still in the process. We got our EIN. We're still waiting to hear back from the IRS about our status, which I don't think we're going to have any issues with. But we just jumped in feet first and went with it. There's a guy named Dan Doffenbaugh from the 1042 Project. He reached out to us a few times, and we've been back and forth. And we were going to do this nice and slow and kind of get everything planned out and have it all ready to go, and just be slow and meticulous with it. And he looked at us and he was like, what I hear is from you four guys. We have 4 board members, 4 law enforcement guys, and 2 of our spouses who one's a mental health advocate, one's a physical therapist on our board. And we were all in a group call, and he said, you know what, I hear like you guys are doing this slow and methodical while you're asking first responders to be bold and take a stand against mental health, but you're not doing it. And man, he said that, and I think all of us, we all kind of looked at each other on the call, and we're like, it hit home. So when the call was over with, we all literally made a plan that the next chance we were going to get, we're going to go schedule appointments with our admins, let them know what we were up to and that we were doing it. And when literally, I think 2 days later, I was able to meet with my sheriff, told the sheriff what our plans was. Sheriff loved it. He actually asked if there was anything that he could do better from a department side, and I told him, I was like, no, sir. I think it just comes down to how people want to find help.
Yeah.
You have your program through the department, and people will use it. People have used it, and they will use it. Other people may not, and that's what we're there for. We're not there to compete with or take away from. Actually, I'd love to work with any department's EAP in a sense of making sure we're having good resources shared. But some guys aren't comfortable going to a department. That's cool. That's just how it is. And so we're not trying to take away. We're never going to talk bad about an EAP. or a peer support group, because we all have the same heart to take care of each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's just where people are comfortable going, and we just made an opportunity for that for others, and here we are.
Yeah, most people um, scared or worried to go use a department program because the stigma is that if they determine that, oh, I'm going through something, then they have the possibility of taking my badge and my gun away from me. And that's another stigma that has to be broken, is that it's okay not to be okay the new slogan.
Definitely, yeah. That's when I first met with my counselor. That's one of the first rules I laid out. I was like, look, if I get the feeling you're trying to come after my gun, I'm done. I would rather go back to work and stuff it down and not deal with it, because that's my sense of protection. That's my sense of identity right now, and I'm willing to work past that. But if I get the feeling that you're coming to take away my profession and, well, actually at the time, who I am away from me, uh, it's not going to work for me. And that's what I talk to guys about now. I'm not Detective Alan Cormier. I am Alan Cormier. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a friend. I just happen to be a cop 40 hours
Right.
a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's been a huge change for me in my life and my family life, and just dealing with people in general, because work is work, and outside of work, it's here's me. And I've definitely tried to act more like who I am naturally at work, instead of putting on a uniform and acting a certain way. You get me the same way both places. And I found that since I've been doing that, when I deal with the public, I care about what they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
There's a relationship there. Like, I'm going to approach them differently, and I think it's actually done better for my career and for me personally on that.
Yeah. And once you get to that point, like you said, it makes this job a whole lot easier when you
Yeah.
realize that it's just a job. I mean, that's essentially what it is. No different from you being a banker or a car wash attendee. It's just a job, man. Essentially, it's a paycheck, but it's a noble profession. It's something that should be taken very seriously, because you essentially could be the life-changing interaction with somebody, and not even just from the law enforcement perspective. I had a call. We had a little pursuit. Older guy that was a passenger, was having like a panic attack from the pursuit, and I walked in the room just to go shoot the BS with him. And the first thing he said was that he's like, man, he said, you have such a welcoming face. He was like whatever I was just going through just went away. Like, you walk around the corner, big smile, and you come in laughing and stuff. He's like, man, I needed that. And it was like, man, that's just me being me. Like, this uniform doesn't define me. I define who I am in the uniform, and that takes me a long way. I give you what you give me. I clown, cut up with anybody, cop or no cop. People look like, man, you can't be, how you jamming like that and you cop? You a cop. I can still listen to music, you know what I'm saying? So, man, I know we getting kind of pressed on time, so I'll let you wrap it up. Tell the people how they could get involved, how they could use y'all nonprofit for resources, how they could contact you. I know y'all have some social media stuff going on.
Yeah. Easiest way to get a hold of us is going to be via email right now. It is with you, SWLA at gmail.com. It's pretty simple. With you, SWLA at gmail.com. And we're on Facebook, with you. You see logos out there. It's pretty straightforward. It's law enforcement friendly. And we have a website, with you, swla.org. You can go to our website. You can contact us through our website via email. And really what we're looking for is just to create a network of first responders who want to take care of other first responders. And, of course, financially support will always be great, but we just want first responders to be able to turn to other first responders and know that they're not alone. And that's where even I didn't touch on it, but that's the name, With You. We're here to meet with you where you are and give you what you need. You have to be accountable for. We get put into situations where we can't say no. So the traumas we see, we're stuck dealing with, but we are 100% responsible for how we handle those traumas. But we're here to walk with you and to make sure that you understand you are not alone, because you are not alone in this job. at all. And sadly, we feel that way. And that's a culture that was bestowed upon us. But this generation of law enforcement officers are definitely trying to affect change. And I think we're going to see some amazing things in the future.
Outstanding. Well, Alan, man, thank you for joining the show, man. We appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing the great things y'all will be doing down there in Southwest Louisiana, Lake Charles to be exact. Looking forward to, man, maybe collabing and seeing how we could collab with my podcast and see how we can make some stuff happen, man. But thank you again for taking time out of your day and chopping it up with me. Man, we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, brother.
All righty, Alan.